Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab, all on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Hamry, and I welcome you to what's going to be a very interesting hour. We're going to dig into a topic that is really at the top of everybody's interests these days in Washington, and that is to discuss America's competitiveness and the foundation of prosperity and success in America, which is the innovation that has historically been at the hallmark of America's economy. I'm very pleased today, and because this is not only a chance to have a conversation about these important topics, but it also is a chance for me to introduce to you two remarkable leaders who have joined CSIS as senior advisors and are going to be taking the primary role in leading intellectually this important effort. Dr. Walt Koppen was undersecretary at the Department of Commerce and just stepped down and was the head of the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, a gem of an organization that Americans don't fully appreciate. And we'll explore that a little bit. I think you're going to hear the word NIST pop up every now and then in this conversation. And I would invite all of you to go to the website if you don't know about NIST and just spend 15 minutes. You'll marvel at what you're going to learn. Andre Iancu is with us also as Undersecretary at the Commerce Department and was the head of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. A lawyer by training, well, an engineer, and then he became a lawyer, and then I think like a few very wise people realize there's money in the trademark and patent business when you're a lawyer, and he created a very successful practice, but then in the process had a larger sensibility about service and came to run the patent office and really did some remarkable work. And we're going to talk about that now as one of the foundation stones for an innovation strategy. So this is going to be a very exciting morning, and I'm really pleased that all of you can join us. So let me start this, because of course our goal here is to strengthen America's economy and its competitiveness, because we're in an incredible new era. And so let me just start by saying that everybody in Washington talks about innovation. And this project we call Renewing American Innovation. But the question is, what does that mean? And let me just ask, Walt, let me ask you to start here. When we talk about innovation, what does that mean to you? How do you use that term, and how do we understand what you mean when you use the term innovation?
Well, John, thanks so much. And it's a delight to be with you and with my friend and colleague, Andre, on this morning's program. Innovation is new ideas and inventions that are translated to practical value and benefit. So new products, methods, new services that improve quality of life and can grow the economy and our competitiveness. So by innovation, we don't just mean creativity, imagination, inspiration. Innovation is actually transforming invention to reality and impact.
Oh, that's great. But then you mentioned, Walt, and the way you framed it is that it is about imagination. It is about ideas, but it's also about realizing them, making them concrete. And of course, that gets to the very question of intellectual property, because that's the glue that connects those two pieces. So let me ask you, Andre, what do you see is the connection here between intellectual property and innovation, and how we should think about this as we launch this effort?
Sure. Thanks, John, and great to be with you and everyone at CSIS, and great to be connected once again with my former colleague from the Department of Commerce, Dr. Koppen. And yeah, it's a great question, because you're right. It's at the key of what it's at the core of what we're talking about here. Innovation from the beginning of this country has been the key driver of economic growth in the United States. And I think there's broad-based agreement that on that point, and that we need more and more innovation. But then there is a secondary question, which is, what about intellectual property? And IP, from the beginning of the country as well, has been a key driver of that innovation that we just mentioned. And it was so important that it was put in the U.S. Constitution by the founders. And from the beginning of the country, intellectual property has created a set of incentives, a set of protections that has fostered a dynamic competition and the ability to create those, to bring those ideas that Walt mentioned to practical application. The result, because of the intellectual property that fuels this innovation, the result has been the fastest growth of human development in the entirety of human history from the beginning until now. So, the key, a key for what we're going to do here in this project with CSIS, John, is to make these connections between intellectual property and innovation.
Walt, did you want to react here? Because I have a question I want to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, John. And Andre, I think that's just wonderfully said. To me, as someone who's been an entrepreneur and also an investor, as well as leading technology transfer and commercialization throughout my career, I've seen how valuable ideas without protection have substantial risk of going nowhere. And so I see that innovation's seed corn is actually invention. So inventions are property rights. And in the United States, we respect property rights. And that's something so important to build upon. So these property rights actually allow entrepreneurs and investors and companies to make those risk-based decisions about whether to go forward, and if so, how, based on the property rights that they have access to. And it could be through a license arrangement as well from a university or from a federal laboratory. So coming up with a useful or potentially useful invention is only the first step. And the majority of the work, the investment, the risk of the innovation journey then comes afterwards.
Both this is very rich and very helpful. Andre, if I could just ask you just to take a minute to tell us about the Patent Office. I mean, I think all of us know about it. We've all heard it, but I don't think any of us really knows how it runs. It'd be useful right now for you just to take a moment to tell us about that.
Sure. Great organization. Been around since the founding of the country in one way or another. In fact, John, let me just ask you a trivia question that we did not plan for. Who was the first who was the first patent examiner in the United States?
Oh, Ben Franklin.
Oh, okay. He was definitely an inventor. That's a decent guess. Walt?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson was in fact the first patent examiner and the first actual real administrator for a very short period of time of the patent. So the point is, it goes back to the founding of the country. It's a very rich history. And it was the Patent Office for a very long time. And then when the trademark system came about several decades ago, the Trademark Office was added to the USPT, and then the entity became the US Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. Currently, it has 13,000 employees, a budget of over $3.5 billion, all self-funded from user fees. In other words, there are no taxpayer dollars that are used for the operations of the USPTO. And it receives approximately, and don't quote me on the actual numbers, about 700,000 patent applications a year, issues a little bit more than half of those. after thorough examination. And on the trademark side, it receives over about 700,000 trademark class applications. Long explanation for that, we'll leave for a bit later in time. And again, it issues a number of those after a long, substantive examination. So, so let me stop there. But the way it's structured, it is run by the USPTO director, which is also the undersecretary for IP, and that position runs both and everything at the PTO, including patents and trademarks. In the old days, the structure was a little bit different, where the commissioner for patents ran the bulk of the operations.
So it's fair to say, and we should really schedule a longer presentation for our audience and for others about this. But it's fair to say that the patent office then is an essential element of how the government ensures people's intellectual property has legal standing and is protected as valued property for them.
Absolutely, it's the key function in the U.S. government towards that. It also has the policy lead in the administration when it comes to all intellectual property policy issues, domestic and international. Obviously, there are lots of other agencies in the government that have interest in this, NIST first and foremost, but in ITA also at the Department of Commerce, the IPEC, which is in the White House complex, USTR, Department of State, Energy, and so on. They all have interests, but the policy lead does come from the USPTO director.
Well, we'll come back to this because it's such an important. It'll take another session, but we'll come back to it. It's such an important question. But let me ask you now, as we're returning to the original kind of our line of questioning here about innovation and intellectual property. So let me just ask, why is this now an urgent question for America? Walt, why don't you start with this?
John, thanks. And thanks also for helping set the context around intellectual property rights and its importance to innovation. There's a broad recognition now that the United States is facing unprecedented competition. The United States is now no longer the undisputed innovation leader globally, although historically we've been seen in that way. Important legislative and regulatory proposals have been put forth at this time, and they're based on the findings also of the Return on Investment Initiative that was led by NIST, our National Institute of Standards and Technology. A roadmap was actually developed by NIST. It was called the Green Paper, and we'll perhaps have the chance to get back to that topic as well. But these developments include a legislative proposal to modernize the Stevenson-Weidler Act, which as of now in 2021 is just over 40 years old, just like the Bayh-Dole Act. And so that legislative action is now with the Senate Commerce, Science and Transportation Committee, and also with the House Science, Space and Technology Committee for their sponsorship. They've been tremendously supportive throughout. As the product of a national conversation and broad federal interagency consensus. The need for effective US innovation policy has been discussed over many years. There are reports from the national academies, for example, that indicate the importance of this for the United States' future. And so it's clearly time for the United States to take well-informed action. Both Andre and I in our prior roles have been champions for clear and predictable intellectual property rights, for efficiencies in technology transfer and modernization, and clarity in tech transfer statutes. Looking to the future for strategic science and technology investment for this nation, looking to the inclusivity of our innovation ecosystems nationwide, so we have higher degrees of productive participation in America's innovation economy going forward. And also to look to our infrastructure for the United States. We've seen during the COVID pandemic very clear evidence of fractures in America's supply chain, in some cases due to globalization trends and shorter-term interests of the corporate sector. But now's the time for us to rethink as a nation our innovation process, how it links with IP, and to strengthen US innovation capacity in a resolute way as we go forward.
Andre, did you want to jump in on this?
Sure, and Walt said it very well. So let me just be brief. The United States and the world is now at a junction in history when it comes to technology. We are on the cusp of, really at the beginning phases of, the next technological revolution. Some people refer to it as the fourth technological revolution. There are various names for it. But we are at the beginning stages of things such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, autonomous vehicles, biotechnology, new materials, things of that nature, and so much more. We, at the beginning of this technological innovation, we're not alone anymore. The United States, although still in the lead, in my view, for most, although not all, of these new technologies, is facing unprecedented competition from across the world, from the smallest countries to the largest when it comes to innovation. Of course, we know about the great competition from China. They were kind enough to tell us exactly what they're focusing on through their Made in China 2025, 2035 plans and the like. And it is these areas of technology. It's not a surprise. The whole world is focused on these areas of technology. So if we are to maintain our competitive edge and lead when it comes to these technologies of the future, we as a nation must double down immediately and increase our efforts to create more innovation, specifically in these areas, and of course across the board to the extent possible. So we need a national plan. We need a focused national discussion of what exactly are the areas that need attention, and what exactly should the nation do, in which ways that fit our national interests and our way we organize our economy, in order to be able to continue the tremendous leadership we have enjoyed for a very long time, to make sure it continues into the next industrial revolution. And this is the time to do so.
Yeah, let me ask you to help all of us understand a conundrum and a kind of confusion that exists, I think, in Washington policy circles, because everybody's talking about innovation. We have to be more innovative, as you said, but then we have a historic aversion to industrial policy, and that because we say we don't pick winners and losers, we believe in the market. The market decides who wins and who loses, and it's who develops good products and does well with those products that will decide. Can I ask you to help us frame the difference between innovation policy and an industrial policy, because it's the role of government here. What is the right role of government in stimulating an innovative, economy and society? Walt, let me start with you.
John, that's a great question. And this has been a longstanding debate with regard to industrial policy. As we have framed this discussion about innovation policy, it's genuinely looking at the role that the federal government rightly should play with regard to investment in those areas that are important to scientific discovery, basic science, and the entire journey of innovation that I described earlier. At the end of World War II, we had a time of reflection on where next for the country. And we had some very, very important work that came out that resulted in the creation of the National Science Foundation, and really this whole journey of America's frontier of invention and investment in basic science has up until now been seen as a tremendous success for the nation. The focus on basic science, and then the legislation that enabled the transfer of technology coming from basic science at the nation's universities, research institutes, federal labs, national lab system, has been just absolutely tremendous. But as mentioned before, the pace of change and the amount of competitiveness by different rules, by the way. For example, China uses a very different mindset with regard to the management of industrial policy and their national innovation strategy. So with the traditional competition that the United States has faced over the years with regard to manufacturing quality, as we saw in the 1980s with Japan, and our focus on quality, the creation then of the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program, and so many other elements in the United States, led to a resurgence of US manufacturing innovation. As we look at the future investment in science and technology and the elevation of science and technology leadership with the head of the OSTP to a cabinet level role within this administration, it's an exciting sign for us that the relevance of science and technology to US competitiveness, to US innovation, and a focus that's brought by China and other nations ramping up their national science and technology investments means for the United States that not only do we need to look at our investment strategy as we've done as a country over the years, but also looking to increase the efficiencies of our entire innovation system. As I was the director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, I was pleased and proud to lead an initiative that we call a return on investment, which resulted in the green paper that I've mentioned. We'll be talking a little bit more about that as one of the elements of the roadmap for US innovation, efficiencies, and effectiveness. So it's about translating technologies more rapidly with greater agility so that policy and legislation is no longer really an impediment, but ultimately that we create in the 21st century greater flexibilities, greater opportunities for protections, for example, for software. Such an important part of economic growth is our digital economy. And so to provide copyright protections which enable agility, but the protections needed for the industry are an essential part of the ROI legislative package. It's just one of those examples. So it's now about our ability to translate science and technology and not just expect diffusion to happen, but to allow more focused translation of those discoveries, sometimes use-inspired discoveries and sometimes curiosity-inspired discoveries that come from largely federally funded research. One of the statistics that I find quite interesting from a recent study by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS, is that about 1/3 of US patents are directly related to federally funded research and publicly funded research. And that includes many foundations now, philanthropic organizations that are putting funds into the basic research engine of the United States. So unleashing that capacity, enabling more of America to participate is a big part of the initiative that we're embarking on with CSIS.
Jim. Yeah. Andre, your thoughts here?
Well, so to the prior question you had, John, with respect to the scope of innovation policy, industrial policy within the context of the United States and our historic aversion to such policies, we as a nation are a market-driven economy, and we should be that way. It has served us so well for the past 200 years. Unlike China, we're not a centralized, top-down economy, and we should never go in that direction. Having said all that, that does not mean that there is no role for the federal government to study the relevant issues here that will keep us at the forefront of technological development and have a set of policy positions that drive within our system of a market-driven economy forward. So to maintain our leadership, an example is what Walt just mentioned with respect to the ROI, the green paper that NIST put out. Those are examples of national policies that can be put in place to drive American innovation. There are quite a few others, specifically on the intellectual property front, and we can get into this detail a bit more down the road. But specifically to patent to the patent system, what is within the patent system and what does not come within the patent system. So that's patentable subject matter. It is such an important issue because the statute was written some 200 years ago, but now we are facing brand new technologies that our founders, as brilliant as they were, they did not anticipate back when they wrote the statute in 1793, such as artificial intelligence. They didn't anticipate that. DNA sequencing, brilliant as they were, they didn't anticipate that. So things of that nature, we need to study and figure out what is the US policy in those areas, because if we don't, we will be left behind if we do not have at least a policy direction from which we can maintain our leadership.
Yeah, thank you both. Let me, forgive me, I'm interviewing you and you're the experts. So if I might just embroider a little commentary, I think that you said it right. Our form of government, we do not pick winners and losers. We let the marketplace do that. So the role of government in our economic model is to ensure fair markets, to ensure that there are predictable and just methods for conflict resolution. When people have a dispute, there's a predictable and fair basis where you can get dispute resolution, where we maintain stable currencies so that the economy can flourish. We ensure that there are stable and objective, transparent standards and measures for commerce. We ensure that we protect intellectual property. We protect all property, or have procedures for protecting property, but intellectual property is included. And we make strategic investments in the infrastructure of ideas, not in individual, but the infrastructure of ideas. And so, as you say, supporting quantum technology. There's some important work that was done over the last several years in quantum technology and artificial intelligence. So there's a very important thing that the government does with innovation policy that's different from industrial policy. And we don't want to be trapped by people that have a slogan about it. This is an important thing. So forgive me for, okay, I feel better. I got that out of my system. Okay, let me turn to something.
John, if you'd like, Walt and I can start asking you some questions.
No, you're the experts here. There's something that came up recently, a fascinating conversation with you. And it really concerns are we really tapping into the full range of human talent in America for idea creation? I heard recently that overwhelmingly patents in America are really, it's not by discrimination, but are awarded primarily to white men. Okay. For some reason, we have not had diversity brought into this ecosystem of innovation. Can I ask you, let's start with you, Andre, if you wouldn't mind, and then I'll turn to Walt, just to say, tell us about how we could, the importance of broadening the basis of innovation in America to a wider community of intellects.
Yeah. This is one of the most important issues in the American economy today, in my opinion. To your direct point, John, we are definitely not tapping into the full scope of American innovation potential, not even close. Innovation in the United States is highly concentrated. It's concentrated demographically, geographically, and by the way, also economically. You mentioned it's mostly concentrated in white men. I would augment that even further. It's mostly concentrated in white men in affluent neighborhoods in certain parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And it's concentrated in all those dimensions. So an example of demographic concentration is gender diversity, the lack thereof. We put out a study from the USPTO. We actually put out 2 studies over the past 3 years from the USPTO. They were called Progress and Potential. They're available on the USPTO website if anybody is interested. But the latest one showed in 2019, it showed that well, the study came out in 2020, but it showed that in 2019, of all inventors named on US patents, women made up only 13% of those inventors. Mm-hmm. And that was an improvement from 2016 when the number was 12%. But boy, that we have a long ways to go, and we must go much, much faster. It's very similar numbers, in fact, even more exacerbated when it comes to racial diversity. And again, geographic concentration is yet another dimension where we have concentration in known areas such as Silicon Valley, Boston, Philadelphia corridor, Research Triangle in North Carolina, and a few other places around the country. Austin is emerging. Seattle has been has emerged as well. But nevertheless, vast swaths of the United States geography does not participate nearly to the same levels. But the good news here is that there is tremendous potential in all of those ways. If we increase that diversity of innovation demographically, if we increase it geographically, there are studies, a recent study from Harvard that says that innovation in the United States can up to quadruple. So I used to say when I was the director of the PTO, that's great, let's just go do that. Now, of course, it's easier, much, much easier said than done. These are complex issues. Lots of people are studying it. But this issue must be maintained at the forefront. We must keep discussing it, and we must come up with concrete, actionable proposals to address that diversity of innovation. At the USPTO, when I was there, we started the National Council for Expanding American Innovation. It's still existing. It has leaders from academia and industry and government. I hope it continues. That's one example of an initiative where we hope to bring forward actionable ideas and then have measurable results, practical solutions at which we can look at and say and measure ourselves. How have we done against the metrics we set for ourselves? And if we don't do as well, that's fine. It allows us to say, okay, let's try this different thing, make different improvements. So to boost the American innovation ecosystem, this is one of the key initiatives at this point in time. And we do hope to study those issues to contribute to the discussion from this new project at CSIS.
Yeah. And I would just say, Andre, I think now that we've seen the power of collaboration tools, these remote collaboration tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, et cetera, it's possible to create invention centers in remote places and connect them to big teams. I mean, so there are new opportunities here. We need to explore that. We need to find out what it takes to make that work. I want to shift, if I could here, and thank you. This was a really powerful conversation. Walt, let me shift to you. You've mentioned a number of times the NIST Green Paper, and you referred to its term return on investment. Would you share with our listeners here what that is. I'd like to highlight this.
John, thanks. And the concept behind return on investment obviously is well known in financial terms. This was about return on investment to stimulate US innovation and to accelerate it. And so it's returns to society, it's returns to the American people and to our economy. That was the theme of the work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and led to the Green Paper, which was the outcome of a nationwide inclusive conversation with experts, with stakeholders of all kinds from the private and public sectors, and led to a series of actionable proposals, legislative proposals, including the return on investment legislation that I mentioned that is with Congress now. We're so excited about its progressing as one of the steps in building a stronger innovation ecosystem across the country, one that's more inclusive, one that's more efficient and appropriate to the 21st century. One of the seminal pieces of legislation, in addition to the Stevenson-Weidler Act that I've mentioned, was the Bayh-Dole Act, also that came out in 1980, which was responsible for changing the course of US innovation and innovation as a policy statement, because it created appropriate property rights within the institutions that were developing new inventions through the nation's universities and federal institutes. The role of small companies was recognized as well. And so part of the return on investment initiative was a series of proposals that will result in a regulatory modernization to strengthen the Bayh-Dole Act, to clarify its essential provisions, and also to make compliance with its reporting requirements easier and more meaningful for the American economy and its stakeholders. So this is an important first step to maintain the integrity of these pieces of legislation that have been so important for the United States. Before the Bayh-Dole Act was put in place in 1980, despite substantial investments in healthcare-related technologies, not a single drug, not a single therapeutic, not a single vaccine was actually brought into the marketplace, again, because of the lack of appropriate incentives through intellectual property protection. Now we have that as an important part of our system, and so protecting and building upon those essential elements for US innovation in an inclusive way is so important. So it's about greater agility in structuring public-private partnerships, being able to capture intellectual property rights for software, so important, as mentioned earlier, because speed and access means competitive advantage for American entrepreneurs, for American companies. When the Bayh-Dole Act came out, the whole concept of startups and venture capital was in its infancy in the United States. Now it's an essential part of the journey of innovation. And just to build on Andre's earlier comments, a recent study of venture capital investment has shown that early stage companies that are led by women entrepreneurs only get approximately 2% of the venture investment in the United States. These statistics, I think, are very important for us. They illuminate, in addition to those that Andre has shared, the importance of inclusivity to create greater involvement in the science and technology enterprise of America. It means new excitement that should be shared through a variety of approaches that can be supported by policy and funding at the early levels. How do we excite our youth to pursue careers in science and technology that will be the valuable career paths of the future? I think these are all part of a holistic view that we see for illuminating the importance of inclusion in research, in innovation, in entrepreneurship, and ultimately in America's success going forward.
Walt, this is first of all of our viewers here. You can read the NIST green paper. Go to NIST.gov. You will find the green paper there. It's worth looking. It's a little technical, and so I'm going to make this a little sexier, Walt. I mean, so let me ask you. Okay, tell us about march-in rights and why the hell that's an issue.
March-in rights is actually, it's one of the provisions within the Bayh-Dole Act that was considered to be very, very important at the time, and still is an important element. The idea there was if the government was funding research that resulted in inventions, those inventions should not sit on the shelf, or that companies should not be able to get those rights exclusively and not put them to work to benefit society and the economy. It was all about creating returns for the American people. March-in rights have never been deployed. They've been invoked on a number of occasions. There's some special interest groups that think that intellectual property rights should be weakened, and also that that march-in rights should be used for purposes that they were not intended for example, for drug pricing. If a company, if an entrepreneur takes the risk to license the technology and does all the investment to bring it to market in good faith, the sense of using march-in rights as the vehicle for price control for pharmaceuticals, for vaccines, or for whatever, was absolutely not the intent of Senators Bayh and Dole, and they've been very clear about that. So the regulatory enhancements to the Bayh-Dole Act that I mentioned earlier that came out of the ROI initiative provides greater clarity in the march-in procedure, when that can appropriately be used. And so it discourages these types of frivolous or in some cases nuisance actions that would otherwise call for misinterpreting and misapplying march-in rights. There are a variety of other approaches that have been used to ensure fair pricing and access. It's been wonderful actually to see during the COVID era how not only the academic and the federal communities have responded in making technologies widely available, but companies like Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca with products that have gone through the approval process and all of the investment that has gone on there, they've actually entered into licensing and manufacturing contract supply arrangements to ensure safety and efficacy and quality of the products that are going into the marketplace. And having a system that operates really by respect of property rights, intellectual property rights, and the use of licensing to ensure public access and safety is exactly in line with what the Bayh-Dole Act was intended to do.
You know, let me just say to our audience that these, obviously, you now get a sense of the richness, the complexity, and the importance of these very important topics. The richness and complexity of these topics, and we're going to have subsequent workshops and seminars on this, and we will be scheduling one with Walt specifically to go through the details of the green paper and what is, because this is about technology transfer and why it's so important and how we need to refine it. And we're going to especially have a follow-up session with Andre on the big issues that are involved. It'll take several sessions, I would guess, on intellectual property. Several of you have sent me questions about For example, the patent system, one question says the patent system has been significantly degraded through a series of judicial decisions over the last 15 years, starting with the eBay decision in 2006. Okay, I don't know anything about the eBay decision in 2006, but I can tell you we're going to need a full session to talk about these kinds of questions. So I'll defer on that for right now. And I just want to tell our audience, please keep track. We're going to be coming to each of these topics again, because they are also very, very important. And we've got a lot that we can explore here together. I just wonder, let me just ask you, Andre, is there a patent office green paper we should be reading?
There is no green, well, there's lots of studies that are being put out by the patent office, and we've done so over the past several years, but there's no green paper that I can think about right now that's relevant to this discussion. I should note that just this week, a bipartisan coalition of senators sent a letter to the PTO asking the PTO to study the issue of patent subject matter eligibility over the next 12 months and issue a report on those studies. So I don't know if they're going to call it the green paper or white paper or whatever it might be, but at least that specific issue is top of mind of the IP community, and obviously of these senators. So folks should watch for that, and we will be addressing that specific question at CSIS as well.
Yeah, Andre, why don't you just take a minute, just because you mentioned this patent eligibility and being the focus of this. Why don't you just explain to our audience what that means and why it's so important for us to focus on it? And we will.
Sure. So, what is patent eligibility? You know, the Constitution says that we should be granting patents to the useful arts. So we begin there. Some things are within the useful arts, some things are not. So, for example, a mechanical device, a chair, or a program like this that we're using right now, these are the useful arts on which patents should be granted. The fine arts, paintings, dance moves, songs, those are not the useful arts, so therefore they're outside of the patent system. Those are, at a very high level. Now, it gets very complicated when you get into the nitty-gritty details of these issues. So what's happened over the past decade or so is that because there's been no legislation on this specific issue since 1793, the statute as we have it today is basically written by Jefferson and Madison, word for word, in 1793. So there's been no legislation since then, despite the vastly changing array of new technologies. Courts have stepped in over time, and they have tried to interpret the statute given the modern technologies. But the result of that is that a certain level of confusion has crept into the system. And it's become very difficult to draw the line as to what's in and what's out for some of these key technologies. I'll give you an example. Diagnostic methods. Methods on which we try to identify if somebody has a particular disease or not. Courts have generally ruled that those are not within the patent system. And that's of grave concern, not just to industry, but to the overall well-being of American citizens if we are not incentivizing innovation in that critical domain. A lot of questions regarding certain types of computer software. Are they patent eligible or not patent eligible, in or out of the system under the current judicial system? Those are very difficult lines to draw. There's been a lot of legislative attention to this issue. There were many hearings that were held in the Senate Judiciary Committee in the summer of 2019, but an actual piece of legislation has not yet been proposed or introduced, mainly because it is so difficult to create consensus in industry surrounding these issues. So that's why I think it is critically important that we get together, we bring the various stakeholders together to the table and try to identify what are the major concerns of the various components of industry, and see if a balanced proposal can be created.
Thank you, Andre. Now you can see this is going to be a very important subject for us to explore, and we'll be doing that in a future session. And I'll keep all of you posted. I'm so glad to have all of you tuning in today. Can I just, before I turn, we've got about 10 minutes left, 8 minutes left. I'd like to, can I just ask the two of you your reflections on how Congress is looking at these issues, the issues of innovation, intellectual property, return on investment. It's we have a Congress that's so divided, on issues. Where is the Congress on innovation policy? Walt, start with you.
John, I think the beauty of this topic of innovation and inclusion, the future of the US leadership in standards and standardization, one of the other pillars of the project that we're leading on renewing American innovation, and also looking to the future of America's talent pool from both domestic as well as international sources. I'm a first generation American, and Andre represents a really valued immigrant to the United States. And so much of America's power over the years has been as the melting pot of the world and as a magnet for the world's talent. And so there are controversies in all of these topics, but there are also great unifying principles there. It's exciting to see not only the legislative and regulatory proposals that I've mentioned, but there are a number of other initiatives that are focused on the future of investment in science and technology, investment in America's infrastructure for innovation, in America's manufacturing resurgence, in building innovation ecosystems that are not geographically concentrated as they have been, but more diverse geographically and also more inclusive. This is a wonderful time to have these conversations, this initiative, and I'm thrilled at the bipartisan support. Indeed, it's a nonpartisan topic for the future of America's competition against foes that have very clearly organized themselves against industrial policy and strategy.
And Andrea, your thoughts here?
Yeah, let me just to tack on to the last point Walt made. It's really wonderful that these issues are bipartisan or nonpartisan. There is broad-based agreement surrounding a lot of these issues. And the fact is, I joke sometimes that especially when there is vast division on Capitol Hill on so many issues nowadays, it doesn't exist on this issue, on these issues that we're discussing. And I joke sometimes that they're kind of using us, as a team building exercise. They're using our issues as a team building exercise. They truly are able to come together on some of these issues. And just as a tiny example, so look at what I just mentioned, the letter that Senators Tillis and Coons and Hirono and Tom Cotton issued jointly on patent subject matter eligibility this week. And so this presents a wonderful opportunity to come together as a nation and work together towards a common vision of the future of an inclusive, diverse innovation ecosystem that not only boosts the US economy, but it improves the standard of living of all Americans. And it gives access to all Americans across all the demographics. It gives access to all Americans to the American dream. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the future. And it's great that we keep talking about these issues because we can tap into it and really make a difference.
Yeah, America by definition is an innovation society, but we need the government to be helpful here, because innovation also means conflicting interests. And that means we have to have a constructive role for the government to play where we can see the very best come forward. And I think that's a very big part of what your focus is for this. We've got just a minute or two left. Let me just ask each of you to reflect. You've volunteered here in your private lives to take on this initiative. You served in public service, and now you're saying these are so important. You want to still keep momentum behind it. Would you just take a few moments to say your aspirations for this effort, and then what you would think our audience could do to be helpful? Walt, I'll turn to you first.
John, thanks. It's an exciting time for the nation. It's a wonderful project together with CSIS because of how much our nation's innovation future is tied with our national security as well as quality of life for all Americans. It's a critically important time for action. As we've noted, never before have we had competitive threats on so many levels that are also intertwined with our economic partners that have, as we've seen, contributed to supply chain vulnerability, weaknesses in our infrastructure, and missing capacity. So it's time for America's innovation and manufacturing resurgence. We have a wonderful head start. We invite members of our audience to engage with us. We have a wonderful advisory board, a very broadly based, diverse, experienced advisory group. So we look forward to your ideas. We look forward to your tracking with us as we have programs, seminars, and work that comes out. And because these are nonpartisan matters and we have a great head start, it's exciting also that the new administration cares deeply about these matters. And we know that America has always risen to the challenge, and we will do so at this time.
And Andre?
Yeah, thank you, John. Great to be with you on this program and to be with you for the project going forward. What Walt and I want to do is to create a preeminent policy center for innovation and IP. And by that, I mean a dedicated, well-funded project, such as the Renewing Innovation, American Innovation Project we're talking about here, to advance American innovation and intellectual property policy in a balanced, inclusive manner. There is, from an IP perspective, there is one IP system. There's one patent system, for example. There's one trademark system, one copyright system. But there's one system basically that needs to serve all Americans and all industries. And what we need to work on are, as I said, inclusive, but importantly, balanced policy approaches that maximize the potential of all Americans and all American industries as we tackle the technologies of the future to maintain America's innovative edge and technological edge. And doing it in conjunction with CSIS, a bipartisan center, and so well managed and respected, it really is a tremendous privilege. And I thank you, John, and all of your colleagues at CSIS for working with us on these issues.
Andre, thank you. You and Walt, both of you. This is going to be exciting, and I greatly look forward to it. I agree very much, Walt, with what you said. This is a unique time, even though our government is so divided and the Congress is so divided. This is a unifying dimension. This is a unifying dimension, and that's because everybody here shares the same fundamental goal, which is for America to survive as a nation and to prosper as a people. That is our goal, and that's what we'll do. We've got a lot of very important issues to tackle. All of our audience participants, thank you for joining us today. You've submitted some very good questions. Most of them are going to be more appropriately addressed in the follow-on sessions we're going to have, and we're going to have specific sessions on the NIST green paper and on technology transfer. We're going to have specific sessions, probably multiple, on intellectual property, revising this very important issue of patent eligibility. We're going to dig into all of that. We'd welcome all of you to join us, and especially welcome the leadership of Walt Koppen and Andre Iancu. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you in the future.